Revenge with Karen.
Karen, do we really need your eyes on everything? Martin sneered, waving a thick acquisition prep folder like it was a damn menu. It's ops, not brain surgery. He chuckled to himself, no one else did. Not surprising. First week in the building and he was already rearranging the furniture, firing off buzzwords like confetti at a trust fund kid's birthday, convinced the entire company needed saving from itself. Karen blinked once, slow. Didn't respond, just kept sipping her coffee while her eyes flicked over the spreadsheet he just butchered with red ink like a toddler with a Sharpie. He hadn't even noticed that the rollover structure was incomplete. No filing index. No risk clearance. He also hadn't noticed that she wasn't taking notes, because she already knew every line by heart. They used to call her the Vault, back when people still had the sense to whisper her name in meetings. 10 years in ops, 7 of those silently patching every strategic hole the C-suite left behind like some corporate Navy SEAL. Nobody clapped for the ghost in the machine. But when the system buckled, Karen already had the repair guide printed and signed. Twice. Now, Martin strolled in from some rival firm, swinging his ego like a wrecking ball. He called her ops girl in front of the intern. He slashed her project list to focus her talents. He sent her bonus for reevaluation. Didn't fire her. He did worse, he made her disappear. Anyway, before we go further down this rabbit hole, do us a quick solid. Tap the like if you're already invested, and if you're one of the 95% who listen without subscribing, well, that little red button's lonelier than Martin's leadership style. Hit it. It seriously helps keep stories like this coming, and yeah, it means a lot to the team. Back to it. That Friday, she found herself uninvited from the acquisition planning session. Her name was off the invite chain. The PE firm, her contact, hadn't responded in days. Martin had restructured everything. Efficiency, he'd said, like it was a prayer and not a knife. Karen didn't storm out. She didn't complain. She just adjusted, took her nameplate down from the glass meeting room and returned to her desk without a word. But something had shifted. She reopened a folder buried 6 levels deep in the access control system. Internal clearance. Conditional triggers V2.1. Her initials were already tagged on a clause she'd authored 4 years back during a quiet compliance overhaul. Most folks didn't even know it existed, but the system did. It was the kind of clause you never needed until someone made a mistake. Across the office, Martin laughed too loud at his own joke. New analysts smiled like it was a hostage situation. Karen just clicked one checkbox in the system, validator token, active assigned certifier. No one noticed. By Monday, the energy in ops had shifted. Her team felt it. Junior staff started bringing her drafts for off-the-record reviews. Some of them asked if they should sign off on reports they didn't write. Karen gave quiet nods, subtle shakes of the head. She didn't say much, but her silence had weight. Lunch, she caught a glimpse of the quarterly roadmap Martin had pinned up by the break room. Her name was nowhere, but the PE firm's logo, big and bold, was. That logo was a problem, because that partnership, that entire relationship, Karen had built it from scratch. She still remembered the first time she'd walked into their Manhattan office, sat across from a VP who refused to shake hands with ops staff, earned his respect in 30 minutes flat by catching a $400K accounting error he had missed. After that, he told her straight, "We only trust your numbers, not your bosses, you," and now, that trust was going to be tested. Karen returned to her desk. She opened a plain text file on her desktop, began typing out a timeline, not for HR, not for Martin, for her. He titled the file, 8.1 Contingency Timeline Unvalidated Triggers, and right under it, in bold, "If they cut you out of the meeting, make sure they can't close the deal without you." Karen watched from her desk as boxes rolled past like a funeral procession for competence. 3 directors, gone before noon. 2 VPs transitioned into consulting roles, which was polite corporate speak for get the hell out before Friday, all replaced by Martin's handpicked crew, exiles from whatever doomed ship he'd last captained into an iceberg. They came in smelling like expensive cologne and mediocre PowerPoints. One of them, a guy named Blake, actually high-fived the receptionist his first day. Another called the monthly forecast cute and suggested renaming it the Big Boy Budget. Karen didn't flinch. She just adjusted her headset, minimized her tracker dashboard, and kept moving. By Thursday, calendar was stripped clean. Meetings she'd led for 8 years, canceled. Threads she'd started now read like ghost towns. Instead of giving her a heads up, Martin simply reassigned her work piecemeal, like slicing up a Thanksgiving turkey and tossing her the bones. She was no longer copied on the PE deal thread. Her access to the vendor portal, read-only. When she flagged a double billing issue to accounting, reply was a shrugging emoji from someone named Alyssa, who wrote everything in lowercase. The final straw came when the internal project tracker listed her role as administrative oversight optional. Optional. Karen didn't rage. She didn't cry. She just exhaled through her nose, slow and quiet, and clicked into a file directory she hadn't touched since the last acquisition cycle. Ops/internal controls/legacy clauses/cert tokens. She scrolled to a line marked validator assignment, legacy systems only, and added one thing, token KG auth right arrow exclusive. Then she quietly archived the change log, encrypted the file, and forwarded a soft copy to her personal backup. That one line seemed harmless, just legacy language, but it was like embedding a landmine beneath a freshly painted floor. No one would see it until they stepped wrong. Over the next week, she built a private timeline in Notion. Every meeting she'd been removed from, every task reassigned, every file edited without her review. She didn't assign blame, didn't editorialize, just logged it all, like a forensic scientist cataloging evidence before the crime even happened. It wasn't paranoia. It was prep work. Karen knew Martin was betting on her vanishing quietly. Ops leads weren't sexy. They didn't make headlines or pitch to investors. Here's the thing about scaffolding. You don't notice it until someone rips it out and the building creaks. The younger analysts started to sense it too. One of them stopped by her desk with a whisper. "Hey, is it normal that finance just skipped validation on the Q3 report?" Karen looked up from her tea. "Did you sign it?" He hesitated. "No, good, don't." She went back to typing. Word spread fast. By the end of the day, 3 different teams had forwarded her documents just for a quick peek, like she was some underground compliance whisperer. Martin, meanwhile, strutted around the office like a rooster in a henhouse. He hosted loud meetings with the glass doors open, using words like synergy and kill the old guard. He called Karen's steady hands in passing, like a bartender at closing time. She responded once. Quietly, he asked if she'd reviewed the vendor invoice for the PE deal. She said, "No longer my lane." He nodded, pleased. And that was the moment Karen knew she was invisible. Officially. But being invisible meant she could move without notice. That night, she reopened the operations playbook and quietly added one clause, barely noticeable unless you were looking. All final validation on legacy, and transactions must be certified by assigned token holder. Single point sign-off. No override permitted without written countersignature from the originating certifier. Then she logged out, slid her chair back, and walked to her car like nothing had changed. But something had. The scaffolding was shifting. The floor creaked. "Karen," Martin said, just loud enough for the entire floor to hear, "This meeting's for partners. Hang back at your desk, yeah." He said it with the kind of smirk you'd expect from a guy who thinks calling a woman sweetheart is still charming in 2025. Around the conference room table, a few of his new hires chuckled nervously. The junior analyst who'd once shadowed Karen for 2 months looked down at his shoes like they were going to save him. Karen didn't blink, didn't flinch, just leaned back in her chair, gently stirred the honey into her tea, stared through the glass wall like Martin wasn't even in the building. Behind that calm, silence honed like a scalpel. Martin turned his back to her like he'd just dismissed a coat rack. "All right, team, let's talk deal points. We're almost there." He patted the thick deal folder like it was a golden goose about to hatch his bonus. The conference room door shut. Karen didn't move. 15 minutes later, the door opened just enough for Jamie, company accountant and one of the last original staff still standing, to step out and wave a sheet in Karen's direction. "Need you to double-check the vendor breakdown," he said, passing it over without looking too hard. It was a $10 million invoice tied to the PE acquisition. Karen's eyes drifted across the top. Vendor routing, asset category, performance holdback, and then it hit. The validator field at the bottom was blank. That field didn't auto-populate, not on transactions over 7 figures, and in that field, per protocol, should have been one ID hers. Because 4 years ago, Karen had written the validation rules for large-scale asset transfers. The system wouldn't flag the missing token immediately, not if someone manually bypassed it, but it would log the absence, quietly, like a time bomb ticking in a locked cabinet. She let the silence stretch as she read it twice, her eyes slowing at the signature block. Someone had signed, Martin's initials. Sloppy, too large, like a kid forging his mom's name on a field trip form. Karen sipped her tea. Then, with no ceremony, she slid the invoice back toward Jamie. "You good?" he asked, confused. "All yours," she said, expression unreadable. He nodded, too distracted to catch the chill in her tone, and headed back into the room. Karen returned to her desk. She didn't make a call, didn't send a warning, just clicked open her unvalidated triggers file, scrolled to the end, and typed one new line. Vendor invoice 44B $10MP, no token ID Martin, initialed 11:37 a.m. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She considered sending a flag to the internal audit mailbox, just a nudge. But no, not yet. Martin had made it clear she was invisible, so let him forget she was watching. Inside the conference room, laughter floated through the glass, brittle and forced. Someone clapped, probably Blake, always clapping like a trained seal at every corporate catchphrase. Karen stared at the flickering cursor in her file, then opened another window, this one a system console. She searched her name across the validator logs for the past 90 days. One match, her token, active and tied to the legacy certifier clause she'd hardwired into the system 2 weeks ago. No overrides listed, no backups. She was the only one who could sign. Karen sat back in her chair, folded her arms, and waited. She knew Martin would think the invoice had gone through. He wouldn't check the actual ledger system, just the pretty graphs his new team generated in Canva, like that made them real analysts. And he'd assume the compliance box was ticked, because that's what people like him always assumed. She let him. The question now wasn't what he'd screwed up, it was when the system would notice. It wasn't paranoia, it was mathematics. One missing validator tag, one compliance clause buried in a legacy subfolder, one overconfident man so desperate to prove he could run the deal without her that he didn't realize she still had the only key that unlocked the final gate. Karen sipped again. She didn't need revenge. She just needed them to keep walking forward, blindfolded, toward the cliff she hadn't built, never bothered to fence off. The performance watch email came on a Thursday, like bad sushi or a surprise thunderstorm. No subject line, just a sterile note from HR, CC'd to Martin, with a bulleted list of vague concerns about Karen's engagement and adaptability in the new structure. She read it 3 times. Every line dripped with passive-aggressive phrasing, appears disengaged from strategic realignment, reluctant to assume new roles as reassigned, emitted upward feedback in team syncs, which was rich, considering they hadn't invited her to a meeting in 2 weeks, and her reassigned roles included managing the inventory of damn printer toner. Karen didn't respond. She didn't even forward it to her personal archive. She just added a line to her growing timeline log. 9:16 a.m. performance watch, initiated vague metrics expected, and she minimized the window and opened a new one. A checklist labeled validator loops red flag pings. No pings yet. The system would take another 72 hours to reconcile the open invoice. She could almost hear the ticking. Meanwhile, the office moved like nothing was wrong. Martin paraded through ops with that smug bounce in his step, calling himself chief visionary to anyone dumb enough to ask. He held meetings about meetings, signed a partner rotation initiative that boiled down to shuffling job titles and adding arrows to the org chart like a third grader with a box of crayons. Karen's new minor role was to shadow procurement requests and approve vendor snacks under $500. So she did what invisible people do best. She listened, she watched, and she started sowing quiet doubt. It began with Jasmine, a junior analyst barely out of grad school, who slid a budget sheet across Karen's desk and asked, "Would you sign this?" Karen glanced at it, 4 figures marked preliminary but signed in blue ink. "Did you check the routing path?" Jasmine hesitated. I don't think so." Blake said it's fine. Karen passed it back, "Then Blake can sign." Jasmine stood frozen for a beat, then slowly nodded. "Got it." That same day, another junior, Illy from procurement, popped over with a supplier contract. "I just need a witness signature on this. They're pushing to close it by COB." Karen skimmed the document, raised an eyebrow. "Why the rush?" Illy shrugged. "New guy said it's all routine." Karen pointed at the margin. "If it's routine, they wouldn't have skipped the net terms clause." He stared. "Oh." She handed it back. "If something feels rushed, assume someone's scared." That night, she updated her log, staff questions increasing. Pattern suggests bypass culture. No internal guardrails from Martin's team. Friday came. Rainy, slow, the kind of Midwest gloom that gets into your joints. Karen opened her inbox and spotted a name she hadn't seen in weeks. Mark Penner, PE Partner, Ridgewater Holdings. Subject line, everything all right? Inside was a single sentence, your absence is noted. Hope you're okay. Karen stared at it for a moment, the cursor pulsing below his words like a heartbeat. She typed her reply, just observing. No sign-off, no context. She knew Mark would understand. They'd worked together on 2 major audits, survived a regulatory fire drill in 21, and closed a $70M deal during a snowstorm while half the board was stuck in an airport lounge. He was smart, paranoid in the right ways. He'd know what just observing meant. She hit send. 10 seconds later, she moved the email to her encrypted archive. She did something she hadn't done in weeks. She stood. Karen walked to the break room, poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, and leaned against the counter just long enough for 2 interns to notice her presence and abruptly stop talking. She smiled. The silence wasn't just around her anymore. It was starting to echo. By Monday, someone in IT flagged a permissions inconsistency on a validation token. Nothing critical, just a silent system log pinging an unverified certifier ID hers. No ticket was opened, but the audit trail had begun, and the cliff they were all marching toward, it just got a little closer. The alert came in at 6:43 a.m. while the rest of the office was still drooling into their pillows. Karen was already at her desk, the kind of early that turns heads but never earns praise. She liked it that way. Empty floors, cold coffee, full control. Message was from the internal system, an automated security audit run overnight. Subject, validation exceptions certifier flag, ID, KGAuth 728. She opened it without ceremony. System note, transaction. Vendor invoice 44B amount, $10 million and 0 cents, clearance attempted. 03:14 a.m. by user. M. Travis, status, incomplete. Reason, missing required validator token holder KGAuth 728, logged as exception class B, follow-up, pending compliance notification. Karen didn't react, not outwardly. Her pulse didn't spike. Her hands didn't twitch. She just took a slow sip of her coffee, then minimized the window and reopened her log. New entry, 6:43 a.m. system ping $10M invoice validator token missing processed, but not cleared. He didn't forward the alert, didn't flag it to legal, didn't even print it, because she didn't need to. The system had spoken, and the system didn't lie. Martin might swagger through conference calls, might rename departments and slap slogans on hallway TVs, but none of that rewrote the back-end logic she'd helped build before his name was even in the building directory. And right now, that back-end was hungry for a signature it would never receive. Meanwhile, across the glass walls of his corner office, Martin's voice boomed out of a speakerphone like a used car salesman doing Shakespeare. I mean, look, compliance is already baked in, he declared to someone on the other end. Probably one of the PE firm's junior execs trying not to scream into a $400 headset. Our team's agile. We're not over-engineering approvals. You know what I mean? We're moving. Fast. Karen watched him from across the hall, stood like he was posing for a LinkedIn headshot, hand in pocket, chin slightly raised, the kind of posture that screamed, I've never reconciled a ledger in my life, but I talk about burn rate a lot. He waved a folder theatrically as he spoke. She recognized it, the same deal packet that had once sat on her desk. She didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled up the transaction flow logs. Sure enough, the $10M invoice had been marked processed by accounting overnight, likely trying to clean the books before EOM reports hit the board. But the status? Still glowing red. Final status. Uncleared awaiting validator token auth KGAuth 728. She opened the backend audit viewer and saw something even better. 4 separate override attempts from Martin's account in the past 36 hours. All failed. Each one logged. Each one time-stamped. She smiled, just a flicker. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, but tightens them like a sniper finding the range. Back in ops, the junior team moved around her like satellites, uneasy. They didn't know exactly what was off, but they could feel it, like barometric pressure before a tornado. Jasmine walked past, gave Karen a nervous glance, and whispered, I heard finance is freaking out. Karen didn't break stride. Are they? They say there's a processing delay. Martin's blaming infrastructure. Karen sipped her coffee. Well, maybe he should try turning it off and on again. Jasmine blinked. Karen returned to her screen. Minutes later, another ping, this one from the legacy compliance dashboard she hadn't used in weeks. A new notification. Audit trigger escalated PE review, flagged for manual intervention. That was the clause she'd written, hidden 3 submenus deep. It said if any transaction over $5M failed to receive clearance from a single-point validator, her system would escalate the failure to intervention status and freeze any follow-on actions pending human review. And once it hit intervention, only 2 people could unlock it, the originating certifier or a vote from the board. Karen added one more entry to her file, intervention status triggered, board notification likely within 72 hours. She closed the window, leaned back, let the weight of silence stretch around her like armor. Let them brag, let them scramble. She didn't have to raise her voice. All she had to do was nothing. By Monday morning, Martin was in rare form, strutting down the hallway like he'd just cured corporate cancer, teeth bared in that smarmy, self-congratulatory grin he wore whenever he thought he'd closed something. He barked updates on his Bluetooth headset, clapped backs without invitation, dropped phrases like full synergy alignment and operational green light as if the walls were filming a recruitment ad. At 9:03 a.m., a company-wide email hit every inbox. Subject: Final acquisition status. Ridgewater team, proud to share that all compliance steps are complete and we're on track for final close with Ridgewater Holdings by EOW. Appreciate everyone who helped make this happen, particularly our new agile leads in ops. Let's keep momentum high. Finish strong. M. Karen read it with one eyebrow raised and a very slow sip of coffee. She didn't laugh, she didn't frown. She just opened her system dashboard and refreshed the validator portal. Status: Invoice 44B uncleared certifier, KGAuth 728 override attempts, 6 last attempt, 08:14 a.m. Martin, result, failed signature mismatch. He was still trying to push it through, still failing, but now he told the investors it was done. Martin wasn't just arrogant, he was radioactive. At 10:17 a.m., Karen received an encrypted message routed through her compliance archive alias. The sender, Ridgewater Holdings. Subject line: Final validation certificate status inquiry. Inside, short and surgical: Karen, we received confirmation from your team that all validations are complete. Before releasing final tranche, need your certifier signature per the standing framework. Can you confirm validation? Mark. She stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Then, with clockmaker precision, she composed her answer. Mark, I cannot confirm validation. Attached, please find memo outlining clause 8.1 single-point certifier protocol. My token is currently active. No clearance has been authorized. Regards, Casey attached the memo. 2 pages, dense but clean. No flourishes. Just legal muscle wrapped in velvet. Internal controls clause 8.1 title. Single-point certifier protocol in any acquisition, merger, or asset transfer exceeding $5M, where internal validation structures are subject to restructuring. A single-point certifier, SBC, designation may be used to preserve compliance chain of custody integrity. SBC must issue final digital clearance via system token, unforgeable and non-transferable. Failure to secure SBC clearance will flag the transaction as unvalidated, subject to freeze. Overrides by non-token holders will result in intervention status and automatic board alert. Certifier on record, Karen G. Token ID, KGAuth 728 memo ends. She didn't copy Martin. She didn't copy legal. He didn't have to. By 11:12 a.m., she received a read receipt from Ridgewater's senior partner. At 11:15, her phone lit up with a call from an unlisted number. She didn't answer. Instead, she texted Mark 3 words, chain of custody. Then she shut her screen and took a walk. Down the hall, Martin was mid-call with someone high up, gesturing wildly through the glass. She caught snippets. No, she's not even involved anymore. Legacy protocol. It's been sunset. I'm telling you, we're green across the board. He turned just as she passed by and gave her a thumbs up like he was managing an ice cream shop and not a compliance time bomb. She nodded once, almost kindly. By 2:47 p.m., a secondary alert triggered in the validation system. Subject: Intervention hold executed board notification initiated. And at the very bottom, waiting for certifier input, Karen returned to her desk, pulled out a small notepad from her drawer, and jotted a single line across the top. When the house catches fire, don't bother knocking. She didn't send another email, didn't update her log. She just sat very still, like a predator in the tall grass, watching as the storm she'd never once mentioned started cracking open the sky. The morning the deal was supposed to close, The building felt like a pressure cooker left on high. Suits from 3 floors up were suddenly loitering around the ops department with clipboards and caffeine jitters, speaking in hushed tones like a hostage negotiation was in progress. Even the office plants seemed to wilt from the tension. 8 a.m. sharp, the Ridgewater team dialed into the final closure call. Cameras on. Smiles fake. Karen didn't join, of course. She wasn't invited. She wasn't even mentioned in the prep email. Her name was about to make a hell of a reappearance. By 8:17, legal called a halt. Not a pause, a halt. The voice on speaker belonged to Jennifer HSU, one of the firm's internal counsels, meticulous, merciless, allergic to improvisation. She cleared her throat like she was about to deliver a sentence, not a statement. Before we proceed, she said, calm as a scalpel, we've encountered an obstruction on our side. Martin blinked. Obstruction? From who? Jennifer replied without inflection. Your own systems. She tapped a few keys. A window opened on the shared screen. Ridgewater's acquisition portal stalled on a single field. A box titled, Certifier Validation Required Signature below it, one name, Karen G. Token ID, KG Auth 728, status. Not authorized. A second box appeared. Clause 8.1 Single Point Certifier Protocol invoked. Transaction ID 44B. Amount $10 million and 0 cents. Current status. Uncleared risk sign-off blocked. Jennifer's voice never changed. We cannot proceed under intervention lock. The certifier's token is still active. No override permissions exist under this clause. Martin's jaw flexed so hard it looked like it might crack. Hold on, he muttered, already scrambling to mute the mic. This is a technical glitch. It's old protocol. It's not even part of the deal anymore. She's the registered certifier, Jennifer replied. Legacy or not, the clause is binding. You've attempted override 6 times. All failed, that part? She said with emphasis. On the shared screen, a log flashed open showing every override attempt. Override attempt 1M Travis rejected. Override attempt 2M Travis rejected. Attempt 6M Travis rejected. Alert. Security escalation triggered. The Ridgewater partner, Ark Penner, unmuted. His voice was cool, controlled. Martin, I was told compliance was complete. I now see that was inaccurate. What exactly did you plan to do if the system let this through? Martin stammered. We assumed the token would expire. We sunset that role. She's not active anymore. Mark's tone iced over. Funny, she responded to my email yesterday with a memo. Yours, however, went unanswered. Martin's face flushed deep crimson. Okay. Give me 5 minutes. I'll fix this. No, you won't, said Jennifer flatly. You are not the certifier. You cannot fix it. Karen, still seated quietly at her desk 3 floors down, sipped her now lukewarm coffee and refreshed her dashboard. Status. Clause 8.1 lock engaged last override. 8:18 a.m. System response. Permission denied next action. Certifier approval or board vote. She watched as an internal Slack channel she wasn't supposed to have access to exploded with chatter. Does anyone know where Karen is? Why is her token still live? Martin said she signed off. Is this gonna delay closing? We already logged the revenue in pre-close. Karen opened her private log and typed one new line. 8:22 a.m. full system halt. Martin exposed formal escalation imminent upstairs. Martin was pacing in small, frantic circles. Can we just remove her token manually? There has to be a way. IT can override it, right? Jennifer gave a half laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Manual override of a single-point certifier token is a Sarbanes-Oxley violation. You want me to read you the statute or send it to Ridgewater's lawyers? The silence on the call was cavernous. Martin finally sat down, hard like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. His bravado had vanished. No more buzzwords, no more smirking swagger. He looked across the room at the giant digital screen where one name remained frozen like a verdict carved in stone. Karen G. Token holder action required. Nobody laughed now. Karen didn't need to raise her voice. The system had spoken for her. The call came at 10:03 a.m., not from legal, not from Ridgewater, from the board itself. Karen let it ring twice before answering. She recognized the number. Lydia Stone, chairwoman of the board, seasoned enough to smell blood under fresh paint, and always 2 moves ahead in a crisis, kind of executive who didn't believe in second chances, but had a soft spot for people who saw the iceberg before the ship hit. Karen, Lydia began, voice crisp, no preamble. We have a situation. Karen smiled softly. So I've heard. We're looking at a total freeze on the Ridgewater acquisition. Their legal team is displeased. Karen stayed silent. We understand you are, at present, the only certifier who can authorize clearance. Is that correct? It is. I'd like to bring you in immediately. As a consultant, compensated. Karen didn't flinch. My rate applies. There was a pause. Lydia adjusted quickly. Understood. What does that rate look like? 25,000, Karen said evenly. Per month, per day. Another pause, not long. Lydia didn't even scoff. Fine, and what else? Karen leaned back, voice as calm as a sunrise. I'll require board access through the remainder of the quarter. Observation rights, attendance at all strategic sessions, and the ability to speak if asked. Not a voting seat? No, not yet. Lydia exhaled. Send me your terms in writing. We'll have an NDA drafted and over to you in an hour. Karen already had the email open. It's in your inbox. They didn't ask for negotiation. There was no counteroffer. The reply came back at 10:14. Agreed. At 10:20 a.m., a closed-door emergency session was called. Karen was patched in remotely. No video, just her name in small font on the big flat screen that loomed over the room like a silent god. Martin was already seated, red-faced, collar unbuttoned, flanked by two of his guys who looked like they'd aged 5 years in 20 minutes. Lydia entered last. She set her tablet on the table and looked directly at Martin. Please leave the room. Martin froze. I'm the acting COO. You oversaw the single worst compliance breach we've had in a decade. Lydia cut in. You're not needed in this discussion. We'll call you when we are. He stood up slowly, tried to save face with a stiff nod, and walked out like a man being escorted to his own execution. Karen's voice came through the speaker a moment later, calm and surgical. I'm here. Karen, Lydia said, now addressing the room, holds the sole validation token required to finalize the Ridgewater acquisition. She's agreed to consult, effective immediately. 25,000 per day. She'll also observe all board meetings for the rest of Q2. A few board members exchanged looks, but no one protested, because they knew. Everyone in that room had seen the logs. Everyone had heard Ridgewater's lawyer say, we won't proceed without her sign-off. Everyone had watched Martin crumble like a stale cookie under basic questioning. One of the directors cleared his throat. Karen, will you authorize the deal? Karen waited 3 long seconds before answering. When I've reviewed everything properly, they nodded. Good, said Lydia. Let's give her everything she needs. Immediately. Across the building, Martin sat in a conference room alone, staring at his phone, watching Slack implode with whispers and red exclamation points. Didn't know that Ridgewater's internal summary already contained a damning line. Leadership either unaware of internal controls or willing to falsify clearance to expedite deal. Either case unacceptable. He didn't know that Lydia had already marked his performance file with a tag labeled, confidence lost. And he definitely didn't know that, 2 floors down, Karen had just slid her keycard into the secure compliance server room for the first time in 42 days. She walked past the blinking lights like a surgeon approaching the table. Calm, exacting, lethal. There was no revenge speech. No I told you so, just silence. And the weight of someone who'd been underestimated one time too many. The vault was open again. And this time, she was the one setting the terms. The emergency board call was set for 4:00 p.m. sharp. No Outlook placeholder, no agenda. Just a subject line that said, Caps, Ridgewater critical stoppage. Everyone joined 5 minutes early. The room was tense. Faces that usually hid behind buzzwords now looked hollowed out by consequence. Legal was already on. So was Lydia, seated dead center at the long walnut table with her tablet lit like a blade. The CFO sat to her right, elbows on the table, hands steepled like a man prepping for confession. And then, at 4:01, he joined. CEO Thomas Gale, tanned, grinning, fresh off his 2-week yacht sabbatical in the Mediterranean, wearing a linen shirt and the kind of sunglasses you buy after a merger goes through. He sipped from a coconut water bottle and leaned into the camera. All right, he said cheerfully. Let's land this bird. Nobody smiled. Lydia spoke first. Tom, the Ridgewater acquisition is frozen. He blinked. Frozen? What do you mean frozen? Martin sent out the green light email yesterday. CFO didn't even look up. Martin overrode clearance protocol. The system rejected the transaction. The final $10M tranche is locked. Thomas lowered his sunglasses slightly. Wait, what? Why the hell didn't we fix that already? Because, the CFO said calmly, the only authorized certifier declined. That was the moment Thomas froze, mid-sip, expression unreadable. I'm sorry, who? Lydia didn't answer. She just tapped her tablet and the screen updated. Karen's name appeared in 48-point font across the shared display. Karen G. Certifier Clause 8.1 active. Thomas let out a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a prayer. Please tell me you paid her. There was a beat of silence, and then another voice joined the call. Karen, I'm here, she said, even and calm, as if she hadn't just brought the entire operation to a screeching halt. Thomas sat up straighter. Karen, look, I wasn't aware you were still engaged on this deal. There's clearly been some miscommunication, she cut in gently. There's no miscommunication, Tom. There's just Martin, and a memo you never read. He opened his mouth, closed it. Karen continued, her voice crisp but not cruel. You want the validation? I'll give it to you. One condition. The board leaned in. Lydia watched with narrowed eyes. Karen didn't flinch. My seat, permanent. Silence on that call could have cracked concrete. Thomas glanced sideways as if someone off camera might save him. No one did. Done, Lydia said finally, effective immediately. Welcome to the board, Karen. Karen nodded once. Then I'll validate now. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. Just reached for her secure terminal, keyed in her token, and submitted the clearance. One line of code, one signature. The Ridgewater deal was back online in under 20 seconds. Compliance cleared. The CFO confirmed. Transaction unlocked. Ridgewater notified. Karen muted herself again. The call ended 5 minutes later. Nobody said Martin's name. Nobody needed to. Across the company, the ripple effect hit like a shockwave. Word traveled fast. The person they pushed out had just been elevated above the people who erased her. Karen returned to her desk, just as quiet as before. No fanfare. No parade. She opened a new file, titled it Board Session 1 Notes, and began typing. Then, and only then, she whispered to herself, You told me to hang back. Her fingers hovered over the keys. I did. She hit save. And look what fell into my lap. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.